Oh my gosh, this is gonna make a terrible mess. ASRock has sent me a lot of stuff. Phantom Gaming. So Phantom Gaming is the new thing that ASRock is really excited about. It's like their gaming brand, and they do things like the Phantom Gaming Z390 motherboard that I reviewed. I really like this motherboard as a sort of budget motherboard, but still has some kind of enthusiast features. Like, I really think ASRock knows what they're doing with like the Tai Chi line, because when the Tai Chi first came out, that was some of my first like real reviews where I got to dive into it. It was basically everything you need, nothing you don't. The Phantom Gaming is everything you need, nothing you don't, but they splurge a little bit more. So like this has 2.5 gigabit LAN, which is pretty awesome, although it's hard to find a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet switch. But it's nice to have the 2.5 gigabit capability if you've got a switch and some of the other stuff. But I mean, this still has the dual M.2 plus the M.2 Wi-Fi option. It's got pretty good voltage regulation capability, so we can do that 5 gigahertz overclock, which, by the way, I'm running a i7 9700K. ASRock sent me all of this to do a build. Well, actually, there was some back and forth because they were like, hey, well, we really want to get the word out about Phantom Gaming. And ASRock has been really good about supporting the Linux community and doing some of the development and integration and stuff like that. And AMD with the AMD GPU extensions for like the RX 580 and the RX 590, that has worked really well. So I said, okay, that's cool. We'll do that. We'll do a build and we'll see how it goes. So we've got the 9700K that we're gonna run at 5 gigahertz on the Hyper 212 Evo. It's the Hyper 212 RGB Phantom Gaming Edition. So it's the Hyper 212 with some improvements. But yeah, a tower cooler that can do 5 gigahertz on an 8-core CPU. I mean, the Hyper 212 is a legendary cooler from Cooler Master, and it's still perfectly viable today. We're gonna do a build with it. It's gonna be pretty awesome. And all of that is gonna go in the Masterbox K500 Phantom Gaming Edition. For memory, we've got the T-Force DDR4 gaming. This is from Team Group, but they've partnered with Phantom Gaming, so it does the ASRock Polychrome, like their RGB control software. And we've also got a 250 gig SATA SSD, also from Team Group, Team Force. So this is going to be a pretty good build. Now, if I were building this today, and there was another Phantom Gaming graphics card out that rhymes with 11, that might be a higher end choice. But the RX 590 is a very capable graphics card for 1080p and 1440p gaming. So that's what we're going to use for this build, because that's what I have right now, because I don't have the other thing, which is fine. It's going to make a pretty good build. Now, you don't need the 8-core to max out the capabilities of the RX 590 graphics card. You would be perfectly fine with the 6-core i5 for gaming. But if you're a computer science student or messing around with VMs, or you just need the extra cores of horsepower, the 9700K at 8 cores on the Intel platform really isn't bad. The 9900K is a lot more expensive, and really all you get for the price difference is hyper-threading. But with the 9700K, you get 8 true cores, and you can overclock it on the Phantom Gaming Z390. So this build should be pretty awesome. Let's get started. Now, I first like to prepare the case by installing the motherboard standoffs and start doing any cable pre-routing. And then the other thing that I like to do is prep the motherboard. So it makes a lot of sense to install the CPU cooler and the RAM if you can, and then sort of marry those two things together. So with the motherboard and RAM and CPU sort of all put together, we'll put that aside, come out our power supply. Now, know what you're thinking. 550, is that enough? Is that even gonna be future-proof? Yes, we could add a ridiculous like 275 watt graphics card to this build and the 550 would still be enough. A lot of people spend extra money on their power supply, and you should definitely get a good power supply, because if you don't get a good power supply, it will lead to system instability. But I like what Cooler Master is doing in general, and the V550, like the 550, 600, 700 watt power supplies from Cooler Master, I have built a lot of systems to use those, and they generally work well. And even though this is an 8-core system, which is pretty beastly, 550 watts is all we really need. Now, yes, this power supply is somewhat modular. You've got modular connectors for the peripherals, but the PCIe and CPU power and motherboard power cables, those are all built in. And those are also not blackout cables or braided cables or anything like that. They do have this nice mesh around them, but you saved some money on the power supply. You didn't buy too much power supply. Do you really want to pay extra for, all black cables? This power supply is also rated 80 plus gold. It can actually deliver 540 watts on the 12 volt rail and 100 watts on all the other rails. So 550 watts I think is pretty conservative. There are power supplies out there that are they can deliver 420 watts on the 12 volt power rail and then 100 watts on everything else. And they're like, oh, we're also 550 watts. So it's a weird sort of way that they do math. But this thing can deliver 45 amps on the 12 volt rail. So it's about 540 watts on the 12 volt rail, which is pretty substantial. Now, when you mount your power supply, you really want to mount your power supply fan side down. So it looks like it's upside down. If you look at it from the side, it looks like the power supply is upside down, but in fact it is not upside down because the fan is at the bottom, so it's going to bring in air from the bottom and exhaust it at the back. And our master box case does have a nice magnetic dust filter on the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not magnetic, it's held in place by clips. But it's got a dust filter, which is the important part. Now, one thing that I discovered was the two fans in the front came in our Cooler Master case. The cables are pretty short, and the reason for that is because it comes with this nifty little, Molex to 3-pin adapter, so you can just plug these fans in and run them at a fixed RPM all the time. I'd kind of like to run those fans off the motherboard though, and so the Phantom Gaming Z390 has a 4-pin front connector, 3-pin 4-pin front connector, but that's only for one fan. So I'm going to use the splitter, the fan splitter that's meant for the push-pull option on the 212 to connect both of those fans to the same header. There's an extra header if I ever do the push-pull configuration or if we need it. There is a second fan header on the motherboard for a second CPU fan. So I can just do that and use this for my front fans. RGB technology has come to SSDs. They've gone too far. Because it is, like nobody ever planned to have an RGB controller on an SSD. You need a third connector. And on this Team Group, the T-Force SSD here, it looks like a micro USB connector. It's not, but kudos to them for clever reuse of an inexpensive connector. Well, there we are. After about an hour, we got our fully built system. We've got our RX 390, we've got our Phantom Gaming Z390 motherboard, we've got our 9700K processor mounted, we've got our power supply mounted. I still have to run a cable to connect the SATA SSD to the motherboard, but we're ready to power this thing on and install Windows and do some gaming benchmarks. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this build turned out, and this gave me a chance to get a closer look at what ASRock is trying to do with the Phantom Gaming brand. Now, some of you might look at this system, especially you experienced system builders, and say, well, this system's unbalanced. You've got an 8-core CPU with the RX 590, and that's not unfair. I mean, if you're looking at this system strictly for gaming, you really don't need an 8-core CPU. The RX 590 is unquestionably the best deal for 1080p and 1440p gaming for pretty much all modern games. You can get cards that cost more and deliver a higher frame rate, but in terms of like the best bang for the gaming buck, hands down, pretty much anywhere on the internet will tell you the RX 590 is the deal. But if you're building a deal of a gaming system, you can pick a cheaper CPU, maybe a cheaper platform, and end up with a gaming machine that performs exactly identical. Like, you'll get pretty much the same frame rates, you'll get pretty much the same, gaming performance. But having 8 cores unlocks a lot of other options for you if you're into like virtual machines, or you want to run Linux, or you want to dual boot, or you want to run Linux with virtual machines, or Windows with virtual machines, or you want to do experimentation. I mean, the i7 is an expensive CPU, but you can overclock it. And the other thing is that, tower cooling, a lot of people are like, oh, you must go, all-in-one closed loop cooler, because if you look at the temperatures from a closed loop cooler and you look at the temperatures from a tower cooler, it looks like the closed loop cooler temperatures are always better. But the reality is that closed loop coolers take a longer time to heat up. There's a heat soak issue. The tower coolers will get hot fast, but they'll cool off fast. And so even though this is a tower cooler, because it's a really well-engineered Hyper 212 Evo, I'm still able to get 5 gigahertz on this. Now that's 5 gigahertz of day-to-day usage with a very, very slight 75 millivolt offset overclock. And that's also with using some negative multipliers on the AVX. So I wasn't able to get 5 gigahertz stable with AVX, but 4.7 to 4.8 on the AVX, which is not bad. and 5 gigahertz, 8 core, all core overclock for gaming and that kind of thing, overnight stability. Now, I did have 1 or 2 hiccups at 5 gigahertz when I was running some of the benchmarks. I was able to back it off to 4.9 gigahertz and it was perfectly stable. At 5 gigahertz, I also saw the temperature go as high as 97C on 1 core. So I think with my particular 9700K, because I have 1 core, core 0, for whatever reason, seems to run hotter than any other core. I don't think it's Windows. But that's a particular limitation of my particular 9700K. Now, for whatever reason, even at 97, it's basically fine, and I can do the 5 gigahertz overnight stable. But I have a feeling that like longer term, the CPU is going to be better off at like 4.9. But even with my 5 gigahertz configuration, this thing was pretty stable and quiet. The fans were not going insane, and it wasn't any kind of like ridiculous setup or ridiculous, whatever. And as you can see from the benchmarks on screen, it actually ran really well with a lot of different games, especially at 1080p, but also 1440p was entirely playable. Now, we were using the Asus 279Q. It's a FreeSync monitor, and FreeSync works great. I mean, it pairs really well with this particular setup. So all in all, I'm really happy with how this build turned out. And yeah, it's a little bit of an unusual build. It's not, I wouldn't call it a gaming build per se, just gaming. You can do a lot more than gaming, but I can really appreciate what ASRock is trying to do with the whole phantom gaming thing. I mean, this has a certain aesthetic and all of the parts match. And that's kind of the thing that, different vendors are offering this generation. There are, you've got the, like the gaming brand for literally everything. I mean, everything from like the power supply to that kind of thing. But I think ASRock has done a little bit more pragmatic approach here. They partnered with Team Group. We've got pretty solid memory that's running at 3200 on the XMP profile. We've got the Team Group SSD, and it's a SATA SSD. An NVMe drive would be faster, but for this build, I mean, the experience was still really good. So yeah, you could spend much less money on your CPU. You could get that i5, 4-core or a 6-core. The 4-core is not really going to be bottleneck, but if you get the 6 or 8 core, you can upgrade down the line. A year or two from now, whatever the current $250 graphics card is, you can put right in here. It's not going to be a bottleneck with that 8-core CPU. You don't have to upgrade anything else. You also got 2 empty memory slots, so if you want to move from 16 gigabytes of memory to 32 gigabytes of memory on down the road, you can totally do that. And that 520 watt, 550 watt power supply is not going to be a limitation. So good job, ASRock. This was an interesting build. It's interesting to see what ASRock was up to with these parts, and I kind of like where they're going with the Phantom Gaming brand. Well, that's been a build video, and I want to put Linux on this thing and do some stuff with Looking Glass. I've got some projects in mind for Jeff, so maybe we can turn this into a little bit of a FreeSync monster. I've got to do some Linux videos with that too, but for more details about that and to chit-chat on those kind of things, you're going to have to go to the Level 1 forum, which is where I'm heading now. I'm Wendell, I'm signing out, and I'll see you there. Oh, and before I forget, big thanks to ASRock, Team Group, and Cooler Master for supplying all of the parts for this system, except for the CPU. Level 1 did that. We've got something special in mind, planned for this system, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, Team Group, Cooler Master. Cooler Master's done a nice job with the custom Phantom Gaming K500 version of the case. This is a pretty competent case. Mesh front, pretty good breathability. It's pretty quiet. Good job, guys. Nicely done.